begin to touch the millions spending hours riveted to the tube.
Put your knife down, Mary!
But what of Jews who still remain in the old countries?
Do you remember those slow, sacred Sundays? The kind that shaped everything from breakfast to bedtime? In 1950s America, Sundays meant polished shoes, pot roast in the oven, and quiet moments that brought families and neighborhoods closer. What happens to a country when days like that disappear? You did not just go to church. You dressed for it like it was the event of the year. Your Sunday best was not optional. Boys had stiff collars and slicked back hair. Girls wore frilly dresses, patent leather shoes, and sometimes gloves that matched their purse. Moms ironed everything the night before. Dads pressed their trousers. And those clothes were sacred. No stains, no wrinkles, no roughhousing. You walked carefully, sat carefully, breathed carefully. Church was about respect, and it started with what you wore. There was a kind of reverence in dressing up, not for fashion, but for the moment. Everyone in town looked their sharpest on Sundays. It felt like a quiet kind of pride, knowing you belonged. Even if your shoes pinched or your tie itched, you wore it with honor. After church, you peeled those layers off like armor, but in that moment, they meant something. Today, dress codes are casual. Back then, looking your best was part of showing up. You might not remember every sermon, but you remember the shine of your shoes, the starch in your shirt, and the way your mother smiled when you finally got your collar straight. Sunday best was more than a rule. It was a ritual. If you lived in a small town in the 1950s, you probably walked to church. Not drove, walked. Whole families dressed in their Sunday best, strolling the quiet neighborhood streets. Church bells would echo from blocks away, and people followed the sound like clockwork. You waved to neighbors along the way, past kids kicking pebbles in polished shoes. Even the air smelled different, like laundry, lilacs, and old hymnals. There was no rush, no frantic last-minute search for car keys, just footsteps on pavement and the soft creak of pews waiting at the end of the road. The church was not a destination. It was part of your weekly rhythm. One block after another, you got your mind right before you even sat down. You showed up already grounded, already grateful. The walk to church was its own kind of ritual, quiet, simple, meaningful. Sometimes you talked. Sometimes you just listened. But those slow Sunday walks bound families together in a way few things could. Today, parking lots fill up and engines idle. But back then, your feet led you to faith. Sunday school was not just for the Bible, it was for the cookies. You sat in a circle on tiny wooden chairs, the smell of crayons and flannel graph boards in the air. The stories were simple. Jonah and the whale, Noah and the ark, David and his slingshot. You colored them in, glued cotton balls on sheep, and whispered jokes to the kid next to you. Then came the good part, snack time. Cookies and red punch, served in waxy cups with cheerful napkins. The cookies were always a little dry. The punch was always a little too sweet. And yet, it was perfect. There was something magical about eating a sugar cookie shaped like a cross after a lesson on loving your neighbor. It made everything feel whole. Sunday school gave kids a place to learn and laugh at the same time. You left with frosting on your lips and stories in your head. Parents picked you up, smiled at your drawings, and asked what you learned, even though they already knew the answer. Those rooms were not fancy, but the lessons stuck, so did the cookies. Sunday dinner was sacred. Roast beef or pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked in bacon grease, rolls so warm they melted the butter. The house smelled like heaven by noon. You came home from church, changed clothes, and waited while the table was set. It was not fancy, but it felt special. Real plates, real silverware. The kind of meal that said, "We made it through the week." You always knew when it was ready, not from the clock, but from the clatter of serving spoons and the sound of your mom calling everyone to the table. People bowed their heads before they picked up their forks. It was quiet, then lively. A full plate, a full heart, and seconds were practically required. There was laughter, maybe some teasing, and always one dish someone pretended to like. You sat a little longer on Sundays. Let the food settle and the warmth stay a little longer. That meal fed more than hunger. It fed connection. In the 1950s America, Sunday was truly a day of rest because most stores were closed. Blue laws kept businesses shuttered and towns grew quiet. You could not run errands, you could not shop, and no one expected you to. If you forgot to grab bread or milk on Saturday, too bad. Sunday was not for shopping, it was for slowing down. The streets emptied except for cars heading to church or grandma's. It felt like the whole country had hit pause. Even the ads in the newspaper said, "See you Monday." Some folks grumbled, others embraced it. But either way, the world felt quieter on Sundays. No rush, no deals. Just front porches, open Bibles, and time to breathe. That silence is something you do not hear anymore, and we miss it more than we admit. Women in the 1950s did not just dress up for church. They styled themselves like royalty. Hats, gloves, pearls, handbags. It was all part of the look. Sunday was their runway, and the pews were lined with elegance. No one left the house without their hat pinned just right or their gloves tucked neatly beside them. There was a kind of quiet power in it, a way of saying, "I respect where I am, and I respect myself." Little girls watched their mothers and learned to walk with grace. You could hear the whisper of nylons and the soft clack of heels on the church steps. The hats came in every shape, wide-brimmed, feathered, floral. Like Easter never ended. And somehow, every woman pulled it off. It was not about showing off. It was about showing up, polished, proud, prepared. Today, fashion is casual. Back then, it was sacred. And Sunday was where it shined. Sunday afternoons were not for errands. They were for visiting. You loaded into the car or walked across town to your aunt's house, your cousin's, or maybe grandma's. No call ahead, no appointment. You just showed up with a pie, a hug, and a smile. The door was always open, the coffee pot always on. Sometimes there was a cake on the counter, sometimes just conversation. But either way, you stayed a while. Kids played outside, women gathered in the kitchen, and the men sat with coffee talking about nothing in particular. Nobody was in a hurry. Nobody checked the time. Because on Sundays, being together was the point. It was how you stayed connected, how you passed down stories, and how you reminded each other that family was not just a word, it was a ritual. Sundays were not complete without the newspaper. Thick, heavy, folded just right next to a hot cup of coffee. Dad would sit at the kitchen table, slippers on, glasses low on his nose, flipping pages like he was solving a mystery. Comics first, then sports, then news, and then the crossword, which somehow always ended in silence and scribbles. It was not background reading. It was the day's event. You could hear the rustle of pages from across the house. He would occasionally grunt, laugh, or read a headline out loud like it was breaking news. No one interrupted. That paper was sacred. You knew better than to reach for the funny pages until he was done. But when you got your turn, that was gold. The newspaper was part of the Sunday ritual. One column, one sip, one headline at a time. Sometimes the best part of Sunday was getting in the car with no plan. Just driving, windows cracked, radio humming. You might end up at the lake or the hills, or just circling the same few back roads. It did not matter. There was peace in the motion, the way the car quieted everything else. Parents talked in low voices. Kids stared out windows, counting cows or naming clouds. You stopped for root beer floats or nothing at all. The world felt bigger and smaller at the same time. These were not road trips. They were breathers. Space between the noise of the week. Sunday drives were not about where you went. They were about having nowhere you had to be. You could smell them before you saw them. Pies cooling on the windowsill, apple, cherry, maybe lemon meringue with a wavy golden top. Sunday was baking day for many households, and nothing said home like the scent of fresh pie drifting through the screen. You watched it cool like it was a countdown. You hoped no bugs landed. You hoped no one snuck a finger in for a taste. The crust was always a little uneven. The filling sometimes bubbled over. and that made it perfect. You knew it was made with care because you saw it happen, from flour to fork. That pie meant the week was done, that everything would be okay for one more day. You did not need a bakery. You had Mom's apron, a rolling pin, and a recipe card passed down through generations, and somehow every slice tasted like love. Sunday comics were not just funny, they were a family event. The newspaper hit the porch with a thump, and before the front page was even read, the comic section was pulled out, folded open, and placed right in the middle of the table. It was the only time anyone fought over the funny pages. You read them out loud in silly voices, trading strips with siblings and laughing at the same corny jokes every week. Your dad would chuckle at Blondie. Your mom would pretend not to like The Far Side, but always read it twice. And if Peanuts was especially good, someone might cut it out and stick it to the fridge. Sometimes you colored in the comics, even if you were not supposed to. You'd underline your favorite panels, clip out jokes to put in your binder, or trace Garfield's face like you were an artist. If someone messed up the fold or creased your favorite strip, it was war. But by the time it was your turn, the laughter had already warmed the page. Sunday comics felt like dessert after breakfast, sweet, silly, and something you looked forward to all week. Even the dog would sit nearby, like he knew it was comic time. No one argued during the funnies. For those few minutes, the world outside could wait. There were rules: no skipping to the last panel, no reading ahead, and no ruining the punchlines. The whole family took turns, passing the section around like it was gold. You got your moment, even if you could not read yet. You looked at the pictures and laughed anyway, just to be part of it. It was one of the only times everyone was in the same room, all smiling at the same thing. Nobody cared about the headlines. It was all about those little squares filled with silly dogs, smart-mouthed kids, and weird jokes that somehow made everything feel okay. Comics brought people together, even if just for 10 minutes on a quiet Sunday morning. After Sunday lunch, the house settled into a hush. Not silence, just the kind of stillness that wrapped around you like a blanket. You were expected to play quietly. Inside, soft voices only. No running, no yelling, and definitely no turning on the television too loud. The grown-ups were either reading the paper, watching something calm, or sneaking in a nap. You played with blocks, colored, even board games were played softer. Dice rolled gently. Pieces moved without a sound. You flipped through books just to look at the pictures, letting your imagination fill in the words. The sun came through the curtains in long, warm streaks across the rug. You might hear a distant lawnmower or a bird outside, but nothing loud, nothing fast. Sometimes you laid on the floor and just listened to the grown-ups talk in the other room. You did not need to understand, it just felt nice to hear voices, calm and low. The quiet felt like part of the house itself, like the walls and furniture knew it was time to rest. You worked on a puzzle, built something in your room and talked in a whisper, even if nobody reminded you. The energy of the house changed. Slower, softer, peaceful. It was not about being punished or bored. It was just what Sundays felt like after lunch, like the world took a breath before the week started. You might lie down with a blanket on the floor, thumb through a book, or just sit near your parents doing nothing in particular. There was no pressure to be anywhere else. It was one of the only times all week that felt this still. It was not boring. It was comforting. A soft reset before Monday came around again. The Ed Sullivan Show was more than just television. It was Sunday night. You turned the lights down low and turned the volume up. You did not move once it started. It was family hour and everyone was invited, even if you were already in pajamas. You sat on the floor or squished next to someone on the couch, shoulder to shoulder. The intro played and your dad leaned forward. Let's see who he's got tonight. That was the vibe. You watched with your mouth slightly open, like the whole world was performing just for you. The acts were strange sometimes, spinning plates, tap dancers, people with dogs. But nobody complained. Everyone stayed quiet until the applause. Sometimes, someone from your town made it on, and people talked about it all week. Other times, it was someone you had never heard of but would remember forever. It felt like being part of something big, even from your little living room. And the next morning, you would talk about your favorite act while eating cereal, already waiting for next Sunday. It could be Elvis, or a magician, a puppet act, the Beatles, a guy balancing plates on sticks. You never knew. But it always felt important, like whatever you were watching, the whole country was watching too. Ed Sullivan himself barely cracked a smile, but everyone still liked him. You were not allowed to talk over it. If you did, someone shushed you instantly. And when it ended, everyone stretched, turned off the set, and got ready for bed. That was the last breath of the weekend, and it always came with a show. Baseball on the radio had a different kind of magic. You did not see the game, you felt it. You sat next to your dad, the radio humming like it knew something you did not. The announcer's voice rolled in smooth and slow, describing every pitch, every swing, like poetry. You pictured it all in your head. The batter stepping up, the crowd buzzing, the sharp crack of the bat. Even if you had never been to a ballpark, you felt like you had. You kept score on scratch paper, just like the announcers did. Sometimes you got the counts wrong, but nobody minded. It was about the ritual, not the stats. You asked questions. What's a bunt? Why 2 strikes? And your dad always had an answer, or pretended he did. The radio stayed on through dinner, through dishes, even through bedtime sometimes. That voice kept talking, calm and steady, like it was tucking the whole house in. You learned what a double play was by listening to someone paint it with words. You waited for the 7th inning stretch like it was a sacred moment. You stared out the window, thinking about the field you could not see but somehow knew was real. It was not just a game. It was time spent together. Time spent quiet, listening, learning the rhythm of the sport and the rhythm of the people you loved. Your dad would grunt, nod, and point at the radio like you were supposed to understand something important. Sometimes you did. Sometimes you just liked the sound of it all. The game, the silence, the togetherness. Church bells rang through town like a memory you could not shake. You always heard them. Always. It did not matter if you were inside or outside, awake or half asleep. They cut through the noise, soft, low, peaceful, like someone reminding you, it's Sunday, time to gather. It was not just a call to worship, it was a call to stillness. The bells made you stop whatever you were doing, even if just for a second. Bikes slowed, conversations paused. Grown-ups looked toward the sound without even realizing it. Some people crossed themselves, some bowed their heads, others just nodded and kept walking, like they had heard from an old friend. You did not need to go to church to feel the moment. The sound itself carried something sacred. It was not just a call to worship. It was a call to stillness, to reflection, to putting on your best and showing up. Not everyone went to church, but everyone heard those bells. They drifted through kitchen windows, past front porches, across quiet streets. You could almost set your clock to them. And in a world before push notifications, those bells told you what really mattered. They were tradition, community, and reverence, all wrapped in a single sound. And when they stopped, the stillness lingered. Sunday night meant one thing: bath time. You might have played all weekend, but by Sunday night your mom was coming for you, towel in one hand, shampoo in the other. You got the full routine: warm water, a deep scrub, and soap in places you did not think needed it. Your hair was soaked. Your ears were cleaned. No shortcuts allowed. If you had siblings, you waited your turn like you were next in line at a car wash. And if the water was lukewarm by the time it was your turn, tough luck. In you went. The washcloth smelled like soap and last week's bath. The shampoo burned if it got in your eyes, and somehow it always did. You tried to sneak out early, but your mom caught you with shampoo still in your hair. "Back in," she said. And you knew better than to argue. You tried to talk your way out of it. You failed. You sat in that tub while your hair got lathered and your face got rinsed, and your mom said, "Close your eyes," even though it never helped. Afterward, you were wrapped in a towel like a burrito and sent to bed with damp hair and clean fingernails. The whole bathroom smelled like baby shampoo. The tub took forever to drain. but you felt warm, sleepy, and reset, like the weekend had been washed off and you were ready for the world again. That was Sunday. Boys in clip-on ties and slicked hair looked like tiny salesmen. You hated it, but you wore it. It was the Sunday uniform, that shirt with the stiff collar, the pants that never fit right, the tie you clipped on and off 5 times before leaving the house. Your hair was combed with something that smelled like your grandpa's cologne. It never moved. You practiced making faces in the mirror just to feel like yourself again. You walked funny because the shoes were tight and the pants bunched in all the wrong places. But still, you buttoned that top button. You held your Bible or folded your hands just like your dad. You noticed how the grown-ups looked at you. "Sharp young man," they said, and you tried not to roll your eyes. But inside, you felt it. A weird kind of pride. Not about how you looked, but about being part of something important. You stared in the mirror, scowling, while your mom said, "You look handsome." You did not feel handsome. You felt like a prop. But deep down, part of you stood up a little straighter, because Sunday meant effort, and the tie, like it or not, meant you were going somewhere special. You itched, you tugged, but you wore it, because Sunday was not just another day. Sunday night shoe polishing was not optional. It was just what you did. You dug the shoes out from the back doormat, scuffed and dusty. Someone grabbed the polish, that little round tin with the sharp smell, a rag, a brush, maybe even a pair of socks you were not supposed to use. You sat on newspaper or a paper bag and got to work. You tried to skip it, but someone always noticed. "You call that polished?" they would say, holding the shoe up to the light. You watched older hands work, slow, practiced, knowing the rhythm, the waxy shine building with every circle. You smelled the polish on your fingers for hours afterward. And somehow it reminded you of school, of church, of walking into a room knowing you were ready. Not rich, not flashy, but ready. You rubbed in circles, buffed in long strokes, and checked your reflection in the toe. It was not fun, but it felt right. Like preparing. Like showing respect for what came next. School, work, life. You lined the shoes up like soldiers at the door, ready for Monday. And they always looked better in the morning. Ironing clothes was not just about wrinkles, it was about care. The ironing board creaked open and someone got out the starch. Shirts were laid flat, collars straightened, sleeves smoothed. The hiss of steam filled the room, soft and steady. And in the background, the radio, news, weather, music. You might hear a favorite song and start humming, pressing along to the beat. Or a news story that made you stop, mid-sleeve, just to listen. Someone was always folding in the corner, stacking clothes in neat little piles. Kids learned how to press a collar before they learned cursive. The smell of steam and cotton filled the house like a signal. Sunday's almost over. Sometimes there was laughter. Sometimes it was quiet. But always there was care. It was the soundtrack to Sunday evening, quiet preparation for the week ahead. You knew not to mess with the iron. You watched from the couch or helped fold the already done pieces. It was a chore, yes, but it also felt like love. Someone cared enough to send you into Monday pressed, neat, and looking sharp, even if you did not care much yourself. Religious programming was part of the fabric of Sunday. You might hear it early in the morning, voices singing, scripture being read, or it might come on the television just after lunch, soft-spoken preachers, choirs in long robes, and messages about grace, patience, and love. Nobody shouted. Nobody sold anything. It was quiet, slow, and thoughtful. Even if you were just passing through the room, it sank in. A verse, a line, a hymn. Sometimes the voice on the radio made you feel like you were the only one listening, like it was meant just for you. You heard phrases like peace that passes understanding and blessed assurance, and though you didn't fully get it, something about the rhythm stayed with you. The music was slow and steady, nothing to dance to, but something to feel. Parents turned it on not as entertainment, but as atmosphere. A little light, a little calm, a little nudge to be better before Monday hit. It was a pause button. for your thoughts, your nerves, your whole house. It stayed with you longer than you expected. It was comfort food for the spirit, warm and familiar. And in a time when not everyone had a Bible, the radio or TV brought one right into your living room. You may not have watched the whole thing, but you listened, or at least you felt it. Sunday streets used to sound different. You walked outside and heard nothing. No roar of engines, no honking, no delivery trucks rattling by, just birds, the clink of silverware through an open window, and maybe a lawnmower somewhere off in the distance. The road in front of your house, the same one that buzzed all week, turned into something calm. You could ride your bike straight down the center without a single car in sight. You could roller skate, chalk the sidewalks, play stickball or jump rope without watching your back. The quiet was not eerie. It was sacred, like the town itself was taking a breath. You waved to neighbors and they waved back, not in a rush, but with real time to spare. It was as if the whole community agreed. Sunday is for stillness, for family, for breathing slower. People walked more, drove less. The stores were closed, the offices dark, and the city, if you could call it that, felt like a living room. That peace was not planned, it was just how things were. You noticed the sound of leaves rustling, the faint music of a radio drifting out from a porch, the far-off toll of church bells. And when a car finally did go by, it felt like a surprise, an interruption, not the norm. You might look up from your book or board game and watch it pass, wondering where they could possibly be going in such a hurry. But mostly, it was just you, your street, and a silence you did not know you needed. Today, even Sundays buzz. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear what those quiet streets once gave us. A pause, a rhythm, a sense that for just one day, the world would wait. Sunday school crafts were not just about glue and glitter. They were little snapshots of faith made with tiny hands. Popsicle stick crosses, doily angels, finger-painted Noah's Ark scenes taped up proudly on refrigerators for weeks. Every project came with a Bible verse printed across the top in big block letters. You might not have understood the full meaning yet, but you knew it was important. You traced the letters slowly, cut carefully around the edges, glued on a cotton ball for the lamb. It was not just arts and crafts. It was scripture you could hold, a message you shaped with your fingers, even if you could not recite it from memory. God is love. Be kind. Let your light shine. Verses that stuck with you long after the glitter had fallen off. Your teacher sat beside you, encouraging each stroke of the crayon like it was divine work. There were no grades, just smiles, stickers, maybe a cookie and a paper cup of juice when you were done. You tucked the paper into your Bible, showed your parents, heard them say, "Oh, that's lovely," and felt something warm settle in your chest. These crafts were more than busy work. They were the first steps of belief, the quiet start of understanding, something made with your hands that somehow made your heart feel bigger. Years later, the glue would yellow and the paper would curl, but those verses, they stayed. There was something special about dessert when it came in matching china dishes. Not paper plates, not plastic bowls, but real ceramic, heavy, patterned, clinking gently as you carried them to the table. They might have had little flowers around the rim, or a thin gold stripe that had faded from decades of washing. They came out after Sunday dinner, stacked high like a celebration in themselves. The dessert did not have to be fancy, fruit cocktail, pudding, a single scoop of vanilla ice cream, but the dishes made it feel like more. You sat up straighter, held your spoon like you were at a restaurant. Because when the good dishes came out, it meant the day mattered. It meant someone took time. It meant love was being served alongside the peaches. You were careful not to chip them, careful not to clink too loud. And when someone said, "Pass one down," you did it gently, like you were part of a ritual older than you could understand. After dessert, they were rinsed by hand in hot water, dried with the good towel, stacked neatly back in the china cabinet until next week. And for a few minutes, even if you lived in a tiny house with creaky floors and a draft through the window, it felt like you were dining somewhere special. that little bowl of Jell-O became something sacred. Because it was not about what you were eating, it was about how it was given, in a dish that matched, in a moment that was shared, and in a house where small things meant everything. The church bulletin always made it to the kitchen table, folded in half, with a corner bent and ink smudged from the pastor's handshake. After church, while the roast cooked and the kids were told to go play, the women gathered around the coffee and went straight to page 2. Who was sick? Who got baptized? Who brought the potato salad last week? It was not gossip. It was community. They read every name out loud, like checking attendance for the heart. They circled events, underlined verses, and made quiet notes to bring up at Wednesday night prayer. Someone always pointed out a typo. Someone else remembered a birthday. And someone inevitably said, "Well, I heard," but never finished the sentence. The bulletin was more than an announcement sheet. It was a thread connecting everyone in that little church. It smelled faintly of perfume and paper ink. It always had too many exclamation points. And it always ended up tucked into a purse or Bible, saved for later even if no one ever read it again. There was comfort in those pages, a sense that you belonged somewhere, that someone would notice if you did not show up, and that behind the casseroles and hymnals, there was a living, breathing network of women holding it all together, quietly, faithfully, one bulletin at a time. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the night air was starting to cool, someone put on a record, not for dancing, not for noise, just for company, a little music to close the day. The needle touched down with a soft pop, and suddenly the room had a heartbeat again. The music drifted through the house, past the screen door, into every corner of the quiet. Sometimes it was gospel, sometimes Sinatra, sometimes a slow instrumental that made you feel like the whole house had exhaled. You did not talk much, you just sat. Maybe someone read, maybe someone rocked in a chair, and the music filled in the space between. No one looked at their watch. No one rushed to the next thing. That record spinning meant the day was winding down. Not over, just slowing, softening. Maybe someone hummed along. Maybe someone dozed off. But the music kept playing, one track after another, until someone finally said, "Okay, that's enough." And the needle lifted. The room went still again. But the feeling lingered. Quiet, full, and whole. It is easy to forget, but there was a time when the scent of smoke lingered in every diner booth, airport lounge, and grocery store checkout line. In the 1970s, smoking was not just allowed, it was expected. Businessmen lit up during meetings. Teenagers passed cigarettes behind school gyms. Ashtrays were on every table, every dashboard, every teacher's desk. It was part of the culture, the aesthetic, the identity. Movie stars smoked, politicians smoked. Your parents probably did too. No one flinched. No one asked you to step outside. It was just part of the air. Of course, we know better now. Health campaigns, lawsuits, and personal tragedies painted a much different picture. But the freedom itself, the choice to smoke when and where you pleased, that was real. It was tied to personal liberty, to adulthood, to rebellion. And when it disappeared, it did not go quietly. Today, you light a cigarette and you are met with side eyes, signage, and social judgment. We traded smoke for safety, but also for surveillance. Back then, you could light up and feel cool, in control, and slightly defiant. Maybe that is what we really miss, the ability to make a bad choice without being watched. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, And sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, they were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. In the 1970s, you could walk into any living room and find a macrame plant hanger swaying near the window. Handmade from twisted cords, thick yarn, or even old rope, these hangers were more than decoration. They were statements. Your mom or aunt probably made one at a craft night or picked one up at a flea market. They cradled ferns, spider plants, and anything green, sometimes hanging over orange shag carpeting or wood-paneled walls. Some had beads woven into the strands. Others had patterns that seemed to hypnotize you if you stared too long. They were often hung with a brass hook screwed right into the ceiling, dangerously close to ceiling fans or light fixtures. But no one cared. It was groovy. It was artistic. It was freedom and nature brought indoors. The macrame craze represented a return to earthiness and personal touch. You were not just buying a product, you were tying every knot yourself. And if you were not making one, someone you knew definitely was. These hangers aged, gathered dust, sometimes sagged under too much weight. But they were beloved. They matched the houseplants perfectly and brought warmth into every room. Seeing one today might feel like stepping into your grandmother's sunroom on a quiet afternoon, the scent of potting soil and lemon-scented furniture polish in the air. Simon was not just a toy. It was a glowing memory test disguised as a game. When it was released in 1978, nothing else looked or felt like it. A black plastic disc with 4 glowing quadrants, red, green, blue, and yellow, it dared you to follow its sequence. And with each round, it got faster, more intense, more impossible. Kids gathered in basements and bedrooms, fingers trembling above the buttons, desperate to keep up with the hypnotic pattern. The sounds were etched into memory: high, low, sharp, hollow. Each note meant triumph or failure. Losing meant watching that smug little light flash mockingly while your friends laughed or groaned. But beating a high score? That was legendary. There was no screen, no joystick, just lights, sounds, and your ability to focus like a laser. In a world that often felt loud and chaotic, Simon forced you into silence, into pure attention. And for that moment, you were in control. You were brilliant. You were winning. It was like mastering a secret code no adult could understand. Simon was not just a game you played. It was a game that judged you. And in the late 1970s, that was the closest most kids got to feeling like they were living in the future. Before SoundCloud, before YouTube, before social media fame, there were bedrooms turned studios and dreams pressed onto tape. In the 1970s, if you had a cheap mic, a boom box, and a couple of blank cassettes, you could become something. Underground music was not a genre. It was a movement. Punk bands recorded in basements. Folk singers mailed demos to friends. Zines spread word of new voices and sounds through mailboxes, not algorithms. There were no managers, no marketing plans, just talent, grit, and a belief that someone, somewhere, wanted to hear you. People hand-dubbed copies of their music and passed them around at shows or sold them at school. Every tape had hiss, glitches, and personality. The packaging? Handwritten. Maybe a photo glued to the cover. You could feel the artist's fingerprints on every inch. It was imperfect, but it was real. Today, we are flooded with polished perfection. Back then, it was about raw expression. You made art because you had to, not because you hoped to trend. The cassette culture was not just a medium. It was a rebellion, a community, a fight for authenticity in a world that was starting to get a little too glossy. And maybe that fight is worth remembering. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. If you remember clacker toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Sesame Street was not just a television show. It was the first place where kids saw their world reflected back in bright colors and warm voices. Premiering in 1969 but defining childhood through the 1970s, it took learning and made it joyful, silly, and deeply human. The show blended puppets with real people, laughter with lessons, and music with meaning. Where else could you find a giant yellow bird, a grumpy green trash can dweller, and a count who taught you math by laughing? For kids growing up in uncertain times, Sesame Street was a steady friend. It taught numbers and letters, sure, but it also taught kindness, empathy, and how to exist in a world full of different faces and feelings. It was playful, but it never talked down to you. It made you feel smart, capable, seen. And in a world where grown-ups often brushed kids aside, Sesame Street looked you in the eyes and said, "You matter." It made television personal. It turned characters like Elmo, Cookie Monster, and Grover into lifelong companions. And it was not afraid to get serious, talking about loss, identity, and family in ways that stuck. For an entire generation, learning started not in school, but on a stoop at 123 Sesame Street. In 1971, a line was redrawn, not with a pen, but with a promise. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and just like that, an entire generation found its voice. These were not just young people. They were drafted soldiers, college kids dodging tear gas, teenagers watching the world split open on television. And finally, someone said, "If you are old enough to die for your country, you are old enough to vote in it." The freedom hit hard. It meant something. It was a shift that crackled with urgency and anger and hope. Youth engagement exploded. Political debates moved into high schools. Campaign buttons were pinned next to denim patches and peace signs. And for once, the future was not just talked about. It was shaped by those who would live it. Fast forward to now, and voting feels like a chore to some, a broken system to others. But back then, it was power. It was a statement. It was yours. We forget that this right was not handed down gently. It was fought for, protested for, demanded. And when it finally came, it did not just change ballots. It changed how a generation saw itself. 18 used to mean something more than college applications and student loans. It meant change. It meant your voice finally counted. What happened to that fire? Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Tang was not just a drink, it was a symbol of the future. Pitched as the beverage astronauts drank in space, this orange-powdered miracle made you feel like you were participating in the space race from your own kitchen. Every kid wanted Tang. Every mom kept a jar in the cupboard. All you needed was water and a spoon, and suddenly you were sipping the same stuff that orbited the Earth. It was sweet, artificial, and packed with flavor. And it made you feel cool. The powder never fully dissolved, which meant gritty sips near the end were just part of the experience. If you got the scoop size right, you earned that perfect bright orange glow. Too much, and it was syrupy sludge. Too little, and it was just sad orange water. Tang was more than a drink, it was a cultural event. The jar was wide and squat with a screw-on lid, and every household seemed to have one. Kids felt proud making it on their own. No adult needed. It became the go-to for lunch, after school, and Saturday cartoons. You never questioned the science behind it. You just knew that if it was good enough for NASA, it was good enough for you. That dusty scoop brought the cosmos into your kitchen. Barbie in the 1970s was more than plastic. She was a portal, a way to imagine what life could look like if the world were just a little more pink, a little more perfect. Kids did not just play with Barbie, they lived with her. She had outfits for every occasion. Dream houses with elevators, cars with glittering wheels. She could be a doctor, an astronaut, a fashion model, a veterinarian, all before you had even picked a major. Her world was one where nothing felt too big to dream. And for a generation of girls, and more than a few boys, Barbie was proof that you could be glamorous and powerful at the same time. You could give her stories, drama, triumph, romance, heartbreak. You could change her hair, swap her clothes, reinvent her life in one afternoon. Barbie taught kids to narrate, to imagine, to believe that reinvention was normal. And even when her legs got loose or her hair went frizzy, you still loved her, because she had been there. She had danced across your carpet, ridden in your bike basket, and laid beside you on nights you were too afraid to sleep alone. Barbie was never just a doll. She was you, just with a better wardrobe. In the 1970s, something fierce woke up in America, and it was not going back to sleep. The women's liberation movement roared into the public eye with a force that rattled everything from beauty pageants to boardrooms. It was not just about equal pay, though that mattered. It was not just about reproductive rights, though that was urgent. It was about freedom. Freedom from silence, from second place, from being told what to wear, how to think, and who to be. Feminist voices flooded magazines, television shows, courtrooms, and classrooms. Gloria Steinem stood beside factory workers. College students marched with mothers. Women walked out of jobs, out of marriages, and into the streets demanding more. It was not always polite, and it was never perfect, but it was necessary. Today, we say empowerment like it is a lifestyle brand. Back then, it was a revolution. You felt it in your shoes when you walked into work for the first time with no man above you. You felt it when you bought your own home, made your own decisions, or chose not to have children, and nobody could stop you. The world had never seen women that loud, that confident, that unapologetic. And somewhere along the way, some of that urgency faded. Rights gained are not rights guaranteed. What they fought for was not comfort, it was change. And it came at a cost. Are we still willing to pay it? The air was getting thick, the rivers were burning, and for once, the country looked up and realized something was wrong. Neon everything was not a trend, it was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. The Viewmaster was not just a toy, it was a portal. You held it up to your face like binoculars, clicked the lever, and entered a new world, one tiny slide at a time. These were not just pictures. They were 3D windows into places you had never been and shows you loved. Suddenly, Bugs Bunny was popping out at you. You were walking through Disneyland or swimming under the sea. The images were bright, bold, and vivid, especially when the sunlight hit just right. The reels came in paper packets, labeled like treasure maps, each one promising a new adventure, and you kept them all, in shoeboxes, in drawers, maybe scattered across the floor until your mom made you pick them up. The Viewmaster made you feel like a traveler, even if you never left your room. It was quiet entertainment. No batteries, no wires, no screens. Just your imagination and a satisfying click with every slide. The joy was in the anticipation. What will the next picture be? Where will I go next? You could spend hours lost in it. You remember how your arms got tired, but you kept clicking. One more reel. One more journey. Because for those few minutes, the world was just you and the magic inside that plastic viewer. There was something magical about a Saturday morning where math and grammar danced across your screen to a killer beat. Schoolhouse Rock was the rare mix of educational and unforgettable. Launched in the early 1970s, these animated shorts played during cartoon blocks, slipping in lessons between episodes of superheroes and slapstick. But they did not feel like school. They felt like music videos made just for kids, catchy, colorful, and endlessly clever. Conjunction Junction, I'm Just a Bill. 3 is a magic number. These were not just songs. They were memory hooks, hooks that stayed with you for life. Even now, adults who grew up in that era can still sing every word. That is how deep it went. That is how much it mattered. Schoolhouse Rock did not just teach facts, it taught confidence. You could walk into class knowing what an adverb was, not because of your teacher, but because a cartoon train told you so. And you believed it. It gave kids ownership of knowledge. It made learning feel cool. In a time before digital everything, it was one of the first shows to prove that entertainment could be smart without being boring. It was a soundtrack to childhood that made your brain sing. The echo of wheels on polished floors, the scent of popcorn and sweat and disco, neon lights bouncing off mirrored balls. In the 1970s, roller rinks were not just hangout spots, they were kingdoms, and your skates were your crown. Friday night meant meeting your friends, lacing up, and entering a world where rhythm ruled. You danced on wheels, you fell, laughed, and got back up. There were couples-only skates, awkward slow songs, and bathroom mirrors filled with clouded hairspray. Everyone had a favorite song, a favorite move, and maybe someone they hoped would notice them under the flashing lights. Outside, the world was growing fast, politics, pressure, and bills. But inside the rink, time paused. Skateboarding had its own revolution. Empty swimming pools turned into canvases. Suburbs became skate parks. Kids carved out space for themselves, literally, where none existed, and no one asked permission. Today, skating exists, but it is not the heartbeat it once was. The culture is fractured, the space is fewer. But once, it was everything. It was freedom on four wheels. It was belonging without needing to say a word. Do you remember the feeling of flying just for a minute on a stretch of waxed floor with the music loud and the world far away? Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Before Bluetooth speakers and streaming playlists, there was the Fisher-Price record player, and it was a masterpiece of childhood simplicity. You wound it up with a chunky white knob and placed a thick plastic disc on the turntable. It clicked into place, and when the needle dropped, the magic began. Out came twinkly, music box-style versions of nursery rhymes, folk songs, and lullabies. The songs were short, cheerful, and unforgettable. The discs were colorful and clunky, with molded ridges that somehow produced melodies. It did not matter if the sound was a little warped or off-key. You were in control. You had your own music machine. For many kids, this was their first experience playing music, and the pride that came with it was unmatched. You could stack your favorite discs. You could play the same one on repeat until it drove your parents up the wall. And the best part? No batteries. Just your hands, your ears, and your imagination. You did not need to understand how it worked. You just needed to hear that familiar click, feel the turn of the crank, and know that something sweet was about to happen. It was low-tech joy in a beige plastic box, and it never stopped playing in our heads. There was something sacred about turning off the lights and flipping on a light beat. Suddenly, your bedroom transformed into a tiny, glowing studio. With each colored peg you pressed into the black screen, magic happened. Reds, blues, greens, and yellows lit up like little fireworks trapped in plastic. Introduced in the late 1960s but beloved through the 1970s, Light Bright was not loud. It did not move or speak, but it taught kids something powerful: how to make beauty, one dot at a time. You started with a blank template or maybe a paper guide with letters, but over time, you stopped using instructions. You made your own stars, your own hearts, your own masterpieces. It was slow, patient, personal. The warmth of the bulb inside hummed beneath your fingers. You could feel the light, not just see it. Sometimes you messed up, pulled out the wrong peg. It did not matter. You just kept building, fixing, creating, and when you finally stepped back and saw your little glowing creation, it felt like pride. Not toy pride, real pride, because you did that. Light Bright made every child an artist. And in a world of noise and chaos, it offered a quiet glow of control, creativity, and calm. If any of these Sunday memories brought back a sound, a smell, or a smile, tell us your favorite in the comments. Tap that like button like you are closing the family Bible and subscribe so you never miss another moment worth remembering.